Welcome to the Philosophical Odysseys podcast. What if I told you that the primary reason you might be feeling miserable on, say, a random Tuesday morning isn't because your life is too difficult?
Right, which is usually our first guess.
Exactly. But what if it's precisely because your life is completely disconnected from the right kind of difficulty? I mean, we tend to treat happiness like the weather.
Oh, absolutely.
You step outside, look up at the sky, and just think, well, I hope it's a happy day today. We treat it as this totally passive phenomenon, like something that just washes over us if we're lucky or, abandons us if we're not. But what if that entire framework is just completely upside down?
Well, that passive framework is actually a relatively modern invention.
Yeah.
And it is a remarkably toxic one, honestly.
Yeah.
Yeah, because when we wait for joy to simply arrive, we're placing ourselves in this state of perpetual, anxious suspension. We basically become victims of circumstance rather than architects of our own psychological reality.
And our mission today is to completely dismantle that passive waiting game for you. We are going on a deep dive into a profound, honestly, ruthlessly practical manual on human joy.
Written by one of the 20th century's most formidable minds, no less.
Yes, Bertrand Russell. He wrote what is essentially a roadmap out of the modern trap of anxiety and into a life of genuine zest. Okay, let's unpack this.
Love that phrase.
Right. If you are listening to this right now and you've ever felt overwhelmed by the rat race, or if you feel intellectually burned out or just stuck in a rut where the color seems to have completely drained out of your daily routine, this exploration is specifically curated for you.
It really is.
We are going to look under the hood of our own daily frustrations and figure out the actual mechanics of why we feel the way we do.
And to truly appreciate the mechanics we're about to explore, we really need to understand the architect behind them. Bertrand Russell is an incredibly fascinating figure.
Because he's a massive paradox, right?
Exactly. On one hand, he was a Nobel laureate and a literal titan of pure mathematical logic. I mean, he spent years trying to reduce all of mathematics to a few foundational logical axioms.
Which requires a brain capable of just the most cold, abstract, detached thinking possible.
Right. But on the other hand, he was a man of intense, turbulent, almost radical passions. He campaigned fiercely against nuclear weapons. He was actually thrown into prison for his outspoken pacifism during the First World War.
So you have a guy who basically lives in the clouds of pure math, but who is also willing to sit in a jail cell for his political beliefs. That is a rare combination.
It's incredibly rare. And the tension between those two extremes produced a profound realization for him. He spent a lifetime engaging with these massive, world-altering political and logical systems, only to realize something crucial.
Which was?
That grand economic reforms, utopian political structures, flawless logical equations, they mean absolutely nothing if the individual human beings operating within those systems are deeply, privately miserable.
Wow. Yeah, you can build the perfect society on paper, but if the citizens are waking up filled with dread, the system is a failure.
Precisely. So he made a remarkable pivot in his career. He shifted his immense analytical focus away from technical abstractions and aimed it squarely at the everyday burning questions of how to actually live.
He aimed his mathematical precision at the human heart. And the very first thing he targets is that myth we just mentioned, the illusion of passive joy. The core argument is that happiness is not a right.
No, it's not.
It's not a given. It is an act of conquest.
And the word conquest is carefully chosen there. A conquest requires strategy, right? It requires sustained effort. And it acknowledges that there will be resistance.
It's not supposed to be easy.
Right. The baseline biological argument here is a comparison between humans and the rest of the animal kingdom. Generally speaking, an animal is happy as long as its basic physical needs are met.
Like a lion. If a lion is fed, healthy, and has a comfortable place to sleep, it's perfectly content.
Exactly. Doesn't lie awake wondering if it's chosen the right career path or, if the other lions in the pride respect it.
Right.
But humans are biologically and psychologically burdened with a much more complex neural architecture. We cannot achieve equilibrium merely by being fed and sheltered.
Yeah.
We require active, continuous engagement with our environment.
And when we don't have that active outward engagement, The system essentially collapses in on itself. We fall into the primary trap of modern unhappiness, which he identifies as self-absorption.
Yes.
Instead of looking outward at the world, we turn the camera around and obsessively zoom in on ourselves.
And that inward gaze is the foundation of almost all modern psychological misery. When the external world ceases to be a playground for engagement and becomes merely like a backdrop for your own internal drama, you've entered a psychological prison.
A prison of our own making.
Very much so.
Oh.
And we can categorize the inmates of this prison into three extreme, almost archetypal forms of self-absorption.
The first type is categorized as the sinner. Now, when we hear that word, we usually think of a criminal or someone doing something overtly malicious.
Right. But in this context, it's a deeply psychological term.
Right. The sinner is someone completely trapped in their own childhood moral conditioning.
Yes, this is heavily influenced by early psychoanalytic thought. The sinner is not someone out robbing banks. It's someone who is in a perpetual state of internalized guilt.
Like they can't do anything right.
Exactly. They've absorbed the strict, often irrational moral demands of their early caregivers, usually a demand for a kind of absolute, pure obedience or perfection.
So even as adults, they're unconsciously seeking a maternal or paternal approval that they can never actually obtain. Because, perfect approval doesn't exist in the real world.
It doesn't. So they walk around feeling inherently flawed. And the tragedy is that this feeling of being fundamentally bad poisons every good thing they experience.
Right. They might go to a party or fall in love or just enjoy a really great meal.
But there is always a voice in their head saying, you don't deserve this, or this is somehow wrong.
They're essentially living in a mental courtroom where they are simultaneously the judge, the prosecuting attorney, and the defendant.
That's a great way to put it. Every pleasure is scrutinized and ultimately condemned. It's a profoundly exhausting way to live because the self-absorption is rooted in self-flagellation.
They can't look outward because they're just way too busy policing their own internal state.
Exactly, which is a very different vibe from the second type of self-absorption, the narcissist.
Right. The sinner hates themselves, but the narcissist seems to love themselves. They desire only to be admired.
But that apparent self-love is an illusion. The narcissist's self-absorption is actually a desperate void. For the true narcissist, vanity operates as a corrosive acid that eats away the actual enjoyment of any activity.
Can you give an example of how that works?
Sure, consider a painter. A healthy artist paints because they are captivated by the way light hits a landscape, or they just love the physical feeling of moving paint across a canvas.
Or they have a vision they desperately need to express. The joy is in the external act of creation.
Right. The narcissist, however, paints strictly for the applause. The canvas is irrelevant. It's merely an instrument to extract admiration from an audience.
And the problem there is that once the applause stops, or if it isn't loud enough, the narcissist is left with absolutely nothing. The activity itself brings them zero joy.
Not at all.
I see this all the time with social media. People go on a beautiful vacation to the Grand Canyon or Paris, and they spend the entire time choreographing photos. They aren't actually looking at the Eiffel Tower.
No, they are looking at their phone screen to see how they look standing in front of the Eiffel Tower. The world just becomes a giant mirror.
Precisely. The external world loses all independent value. It exists solely to validate the narcissist's ego.
And because human attention is fleeting, the narcissist is perpetually starving, no matter how much admiration they temporarily consume.
And then the ego expands even further, which brings us to the third archetype, the megalomaniac.
Right.
If the narcissist wants to be loved and admired, the megalomaniac desires power. They want to be feared. They want to control everything around them. We're talking about the historical titans here, right? Alexander the Great, Napoleon Bonaparte.
Yes, individuals with an insatiable, devouring desire to conquer. But the psychological mechanism behind megalomania is rarely actual strength. It's almost always a massive overcompensation for a deeply rooted feeling of humiliation or powerlessness.
Like Napoleon, right. The historical analysis of him is a perfect example.
It really is. Napoleon suffered terrible humiliations as a schoolboy. He was mocked for his accent, his background, his physical stature.
And that early trauma created a psychic wound that just couldn't be healed by normal means.
Exactly. His entire subsequent conquest of the European continent can be viewed as a frantic, disproportionate attempt to ensure he would never feel small or powerless again.
But wait, I have to jump in here and push back a little bit. We are throwing around some really heavy labels. Sinner, narcissist, megalomaniac. Isn't a little bit of vanity or ambition completely normal? I mean, if I want to do really well at work to get a promotion and have some authority in my office, or if I dress up nicely because I want people to think I look attractive, am I automatically a megalomaniac or a narcissist? It feels like we are pathologizing basic human drives.
What's fascinating here is how we define the boundary between healthy human drive and a psychological prison. The argument does not condemn vanity or ambition outright. A desire for approval, a healthy ego, and the ambition to succeed are perfectly normal, necessary components of a functioning human being.
Okay, that's a relief.
The pathology arises entirely from proportion and dominance.
So it's about when it takes over the steering wheel completely.
Exactly. These traits only become a psychological prison when they become the sole driving force of your existence. When your desire for a promotion completely overrides any genuine interest in the actual craft of your work, you are trapped.
Or when your desire to be seen as attractive completely overrides your ability to actually connect with another human being in a conversation.
Right, you're in a prison. You've lost your outward focus. And regarding the megalomaniac's drive for power, the inherent mechanical flaw is that power without limits always, inevitably, hits a wall.
Because you can't control everything.
Exactly. The universe is too vast, and human variables are too chaotic for one person to control indefinitely. The attempt to bend all of reality to your will guarantees an eventual catastrophic break.
Okay, that makes sense. It's when the tool of ambition becomes the master. So if the megalomaniac is the person who tries to literally conquer and control the physical world out of a sense of inner lack, let's look at the opposite extreme.
Let's do it.
What about the person who looks at the sheer difficulty of the world, looks at the megalomaniac's inevitable failure, and just gives up entirely? This brings us to a really interesting psychological posture called the Byronic fallacy.
Yeah.
The idea that if you are truly deeply intelligent, you must recognize that life is meaningless and therefore you must be sad.
Yes. The romanticization of intellectual despair. This is a remarkably pervasive modern phenomenon. There's an ingrained cultural assumption that optimism is a sign of naivety or low intelligence, while pessimism is a badge of intellectual depth.
Like, the deeper you see into the truth of reality, the more tragic you realize it is.
Exactly. And the roots of this go way back. It's not just a modern goth teenager thing. We were talking about the Book of Ecclesiastes in the Bible, where the author, traditionally King Solomon, famously laments that all is vanity and that there is nothing new under the sun.
And we're talking about Lord Byron, obviously.
Right, the quintessential brooding romantic poet who cultivated this aura of beautiful, tragic exhaustion. And it continued into the 20th century with writers like Joseph Wood Crutch.
Crutch is a fascinating case study in this intellectual pessimism. Writers and thinkers of that era looked at the emerging scientific consensus, specifically the concept of entropy and the eventual thermodynamic death of the universe.
Too good.
Hold on, thermodynamic death. What does that actually mean, and why is it making a writer in the 1920s depressed?
Well, in physics, the second law of thermodynamics implies that the universe is constantly moving toward a state of maximum entropy, or disorder. Eventually, billions of years from now, all the stars will burn out, all heat will dissipate evenly, and the universe will become a cold, dark, lifeless void where no energy can be exchanged.
Sounds bleak.
It is. Everything we build, every civilization, every work of art will ultimately be erased. When intellectuals like Crutch truly internalize this cosmic timeline, they concluded that because nothing lasts forever, nothing matters in the present, it paralyzes them.
But the argument we are exploring counters that this so-called intellectual pessimism is actually a massive category error. It is just a mood, a feeling of exhaustion, dressing up in a tuxedo of high-minded logic.
Right.
You're using astrophysics to justify why you don't want to get out of bed in the morning. And there is a really sharp biological mechanism at play here. The argument proposes that if you easily get everything you want without any effort, your psychological system inevitably malfunctions.
Because you are bypassing the biological struggle. Yeah. Precisely. We are evolved organisms. Our brains and bodies were forged over millions of years through the crucible of struggle. We evolved to hunt, to forage, to solve immediate environmental problems, just to survive the winter.
So when you remove all friction...
Right. When society becomes so affluent and automated that your survival requires zero physical or mental exertion, the machinery of the brain begins to misfire. It lacks the resistance it needs to generate a sense of accomplishment.
It's like a muscle that atrophies in zero gravity. But these intellectual pessimists didn't just despair about the cosmos. They despaired about human connection, too. Crutch specifically lamented that the modern scientific world had destroyed the concept of romantic love.
He argued that we had lost the Victorian era's idealized, almost religious reverence for romance. He felt modern people were just too cynical, too analytical to fall deeply in love.
And the counter-argument to Crutch is absolutely brilliant in its psychological clarity. It argues that the Victorian ideal of love was completely overinflated, not because they possessed a deeper capacity for romance, but due to intense societal sexual repression.
Right. It's the mechanism of the taboo.
Exactly. If you live in a society where even seeing a woman's ankle is considered scandalous, then the idea of physical intimacy becomes this towering, mystical, almost terrifying obsession. You elevate it to a religious status precisely because it is forbidden and restricted.
When you repress a natural biological drive, it mutates into an unattainable fantasy. The counterargument states that modern love, which is stripped of those suffocating artificial Victorian taboos, is not less profound. It is actually more honest.
Because we are allowed to view each other as flawed biological human beings rather than unapproachable deities.
Right. Modern romance is open-eyed. It's grounded in reality, and it allows for a much more genuine, adventurous partnership based on actual compatibility rather than repressed fantasy.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Let's go back to King Solomon for a second, the supposed author of Ecclesiastes. He's sitting there penning these immortal lines complaining that life is an endless, meaningless cycle. There is nothing new under the sun. But look at his environment. He is surrounded by the absolute ultimate luxury of the ancient world. He has palaces, he has endless wealth, he has fleets of ships bringing him gold and peacocks. Practically everything a human could possibly desire is handed to him on a silver platter by servants.
And the result.
He is bored to tears. He is existentially miserable. So let's run a thought experiment. If we took King Solomon and time-traveled him into our world today, if we gave him an iPhone, access to commercial air travel, modern medicine, the internet, would his fundamental philosophy change? Would he stop complaining that all is vanity?
It's a highly revealing thought experiment. And the psychological mechanics we've discussed suggest that no, he would not stop complaining. He would likely be just as miserable, perhaps more so, once the initial shock of the technology wore off.
Why is that?
Because a pessimistic mood cannot be debated away with logic, nor can it be permanently cured by a software update or a faster airplane.
Yeah.
You cannot argue someone out of melancholy by showing them a skyscraper.
Right.
The cure for this specific type of existential dread usually requires physical or focused action. It requires a return to genuine effort.
So when the intellectual looks at the stars burning out and says everything passes, therefore nothing matters, they have the facts right, but the conclusion completely backward.
Completely backward. The realization that everything passes shouldn't cause despair. It is the exact mechanism that generates value in the present moment.
Because if a meal lasted forever, if you could just keep chewing the same steak for eternity, you wouldn't savor the first bite.
Exactly. If a human life lasted 1,000,000 years, the urgency to create, to love, to experience would vanish. The expert challenge for you, the listener, is to rigorously examine your own cynical moods.
Adopting a posture of despair isn't a mark of intellectual superiority.
No, it isn't a badge of honor that proves you understand the dark truth of the universe. Very often it is merely a symptom that you have lost the habit of everyday effort and your vital connection to the physical world.
I think a lot of people use cynicism as a shield. Like, if you decide the game is pointless, you never have to risk trying to win it. But let's look at the other side of the spectrum. If having absolutely no struggle leads to this brooding intellectual paralysis, what happens when we swing the pendulum the other way?
When we struggle way too much.
Yes. What happens when we struggle with maximum effort, but we are struggling for the completely wrong things? We enter the modern arena, the rat race. And to explain this, we have to look at the metaphor of the dinosaur in the rat race.
The modern emphasis on relentless, unyielding competition is identified as one of the primary destroyers of human joy. We have slowly built a societal architecture where success is treated not just as a nice bonus, but as the sole overriding moral purpose of a human life.
And importantly, we've narrowed the definition of success almost exclusively to financial dominance. Money has become the absolute, unquestioned metric of intelligence, worth, and virtue.
Right. The cultural logic is brutal. If you're truly smart and hardworking, you should be rich. Therefore, if you aren't rich, you must be either lazy or unintelligent.
And that mindset doesn't just stay at the office. It leaks out and poisons every other aspect of life. It completely ruins the concept of leisure.
That is the most insidious mechanism of the rat race. It corrupts downtime. When you view life strictly through the lens of competition and financial metric, you lose the psychological capacity to enjoy quiet, non-competitive hobbies.
Think about the simple act of reading. You can no longer just sit and read a classic novel simply for the joy of the language or to explore a different perspective.
No, if you are reading, it must be a business book that gives you an edge, or a bestseller that allows you to sound smart at a networking event.
Exactly. You can't just go for a walk in the woods and look at wildflowers just to marvel at the mechanics of nature. That doesn't produce a return on investment. That doesn't look good on a LinkedIn profile.
Everything becomes a subtle performance of status.
Even your relaxation has to be optimized and leveraged.
And this brings us to the dinosaur comparison, which is a brilliant evolutionary metaphor. The overly aggressive, will-driven, hyper-competitive modern human is compared to prehistoric dinosaurs.
Okay, I love this.
The dinosaurs were massive, heavily armored creatures that believed, in a biological sense, purely in brute power. They dominated their environment through sheer force and intimidation. But what happened?
The environment changed.
Right, and their rigid, power-obsessed biology could not adapt. They were eventually outlasted and replaced by much smaller, smarter, quieter, and more adaptable mammalian species.
The implication being that the aggressive, relentless will-to-power lifestyle of the modern corporate gladiator is psychologically and biologically unsustainable. You can't just bully reality into submission forever.
No, you can't.
And the direct result of trying to live like a dinosaur in a suit is an epidemic of severe nervous fatigue.
Nervous fatigue is arguably the defining illness of the affluent modern world. It is particularly rampant among those who are most deeply entrenched in the competitive race.
And this isn't just being tired after a long day.
No, this type of exhaustion isn't the clean physical tiredness you feel after chopping wood or building a wall. That physical tiredness is actually satisfying. You sleep deeply and wake up restored.
So what is nervous fatigue?
Nervous fatigue is a fraying of the neural pathways. It acts like a thick, heavy veil between your consciousness and the real world. It literally deadens your sensory input. You eat a beautifully prepared meal, but you can't taste it because your jaw is clenched and you're thinking about an email.
You walk through a beautiful park, but you don't register the color of the trees. Your interactions with your own family become purely transactional, managing schedules rather than sharing presence.
Right.
I always picture this feeling like driving on a massive multi-lane highway on a holiday weekend. You know, that exact scenario.
I know it well.
Everyone is moving at exactly the same speed, bumper to bumper. Your hands are gripping the steering wheel so hard your knuckles are white, your heart rate is up. You are driving through some beautiful mountain pass, but you are way too stressed and hyper-focused to look at the scenery.
Exactly.
You are absolutely obsessed with trying to pass the one single car in front of you, even though doing so won't actually get you to your destination any faster. You are just addicted to the feeling of gaining an inch of ground.
It's an addiction.
But the question is, how do you stop the car? How do you step off a treadmill when society, your peers, the media, literally everything around you is screaming that staying on the treadmill is the only way to survive?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, stepping off that treadmill requires a radical, conscious shift in your personal philosophy. You cannot passively drift out of the rat race. You have to actively adopt a balanced philosophy of life that respects and intentionally elevates quiet, moderate, non-competitive pleasures.
So it's an active choice.
Yes, you have to intellectually recognize that this specific type of nervous fatigue is an artificial modern disease. It is caused by chronic, unrelenting overstimulation and a profound detachment from the Earth's natural, slower biological rhythms.
Because our neurological hardware evolved over hundreds of thousands of years in quiet, natural environments.
Precisely. It was not designed to process a 24-hour global news cycle of disasters, hundreds of demanding emails a day, and the constant vibrating hum of urban noise. To cure the fatigue of the rat race, you have to consciously, deliberately choose to value and invest time in things that offer absolutely no competitive edge whatsoever.
But doing that feels terrifying for modern people because the moment we step off the treadmill and try to sit quietly, we run into the next massive modern problem. We realize we are completely terrified of boredom.
We really are.
You've developed a societal allergy to stillness, which pushes us to seek increasingly toxic levels of excitement just to feel like we exist.
And the exploration of boredom here is incredibly nuanced. The fundamental definition proposed is that boredom is essentially a frustrated desire for events. Your brain is idling, waiting for a stimulus that isn't arriving.
Right.
But we must make a crucial life-altering distinction between two vastly different types of boredom: fruitful boredom and stultifying boredom.
Okay, let's break those down. What makes boredom fruitful?
Fruitful boredom is simply the absence of extreme artificial thrills or chemical stimulants. It is the quiet, unstructured time where your brain is allowed to process background information, consolidate memories, rest, and engage in spontaneous imagination.
It's the necessary silence before a creative thought.
Exactly. Stultifying boredom, on the other hand, is toxic. That is the absence of vital, meaningful life activities. It is the feeling of being trapped in a life with absolutely no purpose, no autonomy, and no constructive outlet for your energy.
But the problem is, modern humans have conflated the two. We fear any form of boredom, even the fruitful kind, far more than our ancestors did.
We treat a quiet Sunday afternoon as an emergency that must be medicated with passive amusements. Decades ago, this meant retreating to the cinema, turning on the radio, or going to dance halls.
Today, the mechanism of escape is infinitely more potent. We carry the ultimate anti-boredom devices right in our pockets. We have smartphones, endless algorithmic social media scrolling, streaming services designed to automatically play the next episode before you even have a chance to breathe.
It operates in the exact same neurological pathways as addiction. And the text uses a brilliant, universally understandable analogy to explain this mechanism:
What's that?
developing a tolerance to spicy food. Imagine you start eating incredibly hot, spicy peppers with every single meal. At first, it's a massive rush, a shock to the system. But very quickly, your taste buds adapt. They build a tolerance.
And then normal food tastes like nothing.
Within a month, a regular, natural apple tastes like absolutely nothing. It registers as bland cardboard. An addiction to high-speed excitement does the exact same thing to the palate of your life.
So if you constantly bombard your brain with massive dopamine hits, from a hyper-edited action movie, a fast-paced video game, or the slot machine mechanics of checking your notifications, you literally destroy your ability to feel pleasure during a quiet walk in the park.
Exactly. The baseline moves. You require coarser, louder, more extreme, and frantic thrills just to reach a normal baseline of feeling alive.
The threshold for engagement becomes pathologically high.
It does. But if we look back at history, we see that a certain capacity to endure monotony is a prerequisite for greatness. Great lives and great books always contain long, dull, quiet passages.
Like Immanuel Kant, right, the philosopher whose work completely altered the trajectory of human thought, famously lived a life of intense routine and rarely traveled outside his hometown.
Right, or Charles Darwin. He embarked on the Beagle, yes, but for the vast majority of his life, he stayed quietly at home in the English countryside, spending years painstakingly studying earthworms and writing.
Socrates spent endless, seemingly unproductive afternoons just wandering the market and talking. Deep, sustained intellectual or creative work requires immense periods of quiet focus, which a modern excitement addict would interpret as unbearable boredom.
And this is especially critical for how we raise kids. The arguments strongly suggest that a certain amount of monotony is absolutely essential in childhood. A child needs quiet, unstructured, unentertained time.
If you constantly pacify a child with a screen the moment they whine about being bored, you are robbing them of the opportunity to develop their own internal imagination and the capacity for deep constructive effort.
You are training them to rely entirely on external, artificial stimulation.
This leads to a profoundly poetic and grounded analogy regarding our connection to nature. The author contrasts as a 2-year-old child joyfully playing in the mud with a sophisticated modern city dweller.
The toddler is utterly biologically fascinated by the texture, the smell, the simple, undeniable reality of the earth. Their sensory engagement is pure and direct.
But the city dweller is entirely cut off from it, living in a paved, climate-controlled synthetic environment. We have to remember that we are, at our core, biological creatures of the earth.
Our bodies, our hormonal cycles, our nervous systems are deeply tuned to the slow, seasonal pace of the natural world.
So by constantly bombarding ourselves with artificial, high-speed neon excitement, we are essentially treating ourselves like cut flowers in a vase. Think about that.
It's a striking image.
You put a cut flower in a vase of water, and for a few days, it looks incredibly vibrant. It looks perfect. But it's an illusion. It is already dying because it has been severed from the complex soil network and the roots that actually sustain its life.
The concept of contact with the earth is vital here. Activities and joys that reconnect us to the earth. Things like cultivating genuine, sustained love, the slow process of raising children, tending a garden, or intimately observing the natural world. These activities leave us deeply, enduringly fulfilled.
They resonate with our deep evolutionary history.
On the contrary, cheap thrills like compulsive gambling, drunkenness, or binging mindless passive entertainment leave us feeling empty, jittery, and artificially drained the very moment they end. They are a synthetic high that demands a harsh psychological and physical payment the next day.
So let's track where we are. We are exhausted from the hypercompetitive rat race. We are completely disconnected from the slow rhythms of the earth. And our dopamine receptors are fried from constantly seeking cheap thrills to avoid fruitful boredom. What happens to our psychology next? When we feel this empty and anxious, we start looking sideways. We start looking at our neighbors. And this introduces two massive, deeply destructive sources of misery into our lives: envy and the paralyzing fear of public opinion.
Yes.
Let's tackle envy first because the mechanics of it are fascinating. The argument points out that envy isn't a learned behavior. It is deeply rooted in our biology. You can observe it even in infants.
It is a primal, evolutionary emotion, likely originating from competition for limited resources. But the author makes a highly provocative sociological claim here. He argues that envy is actually the psychological foundation of democracy.
That's a bold claim.
It is the deep-seated visceral desire that no one else should be superior to you. The democratic push for equality is at its root fueled by the resentment of the underprivileged watching the privileged enjoy what they cannot have.
Wait, let me push back on that immediately. If envy is the psychological engine that drives social equality, if envy is what makes the peasants look at the king and say, hey, it's not fair that you have all the grain while we starve, doesn't that make envy a necessary evil? Without it, wouldn't we just passively accept tyranny and injustice forever?
Well, the author addresses this tension with extreme care because it's a dangerous line to walk. It is true that envy might serve as a crude initial engine for tearing down extreme social hierarchies. However, the type of equality that pure envy produces is the worst possible kind.
How so?
Envy-driven equality does not seek to elevate the unfortunate. It merely seeks to drag the fortunate down to the same level of general misery.
So if I live in a tiny shack and you live in a beautiful mansion, envy doesn't motivate me to figure out how to build my own mansion. Envy motivates me to want to burn your mansion down so we both have to live in the dirt.
Exactly. It is a destructive leveling, not a constructive elevation. True, sustainable social progress must come from a higher, more evolved desire for objective justice, empathy, and the betterment of the human condition, not from spite and resentment.
And on a personal, individual level, envy is a profoundly toxic force. An envious person actively hates the joy of others rather than focusing on cultivating their own joy.
They are the person sitting at a restaurant with a perfectly good meal in front of them, completely unable to enjoy it because they are glaring angrily at the slightly larger steak on the table next to them.
And the examples given in the analysis are so painfully relatable, showing how universal this is. It describes women on a train looking at another exceptionally well-dressed woman and immediately scanning her for flaws, criticizing her makeup, or assuming terrible things about her character, just to mentally tear her down and soothe their own insecurities.
Or even worse, the fake pity that intellectuals, scientists, or artists display when a rival fails. The book cites this incredible piece of historical gossip between the philosophers Leibniz and Huygens.
Yes, the calculus controversy era. These were two of the greatest, most towering intellects of their generation, yet we have historical letters where they are writing to each other, pretending to be deeply saddened, but actually reveling in and spreading the false rumor that their great rival, Isaac Newton, had gone completely mad.
Oh wow, yeah, they were literally gossiping.
It's astounding. These men are unlocking the mathematical secrets of the universe, and they are gossiping like mean girls in a high school cafeteria out of sheer petty envy. It proves that raw intelligence does not immunize you against basic, ugly human failings.
It certainly does not.
Yeah.
The intellectual capacity is simply hijacked by the emotional primitive. So what is the cure? The cure for envy is twofold. First, achieving a baseline of your own actual happiness, because a truly happy person rarely concerns themselves with the advantages of others.
Right.
But second, and more practically, it is the intentional, conscious cultivation of the habit of admiration. You have to actively train your brain to stop comparing your inner life to the outward appearance of others.
If you are walking outside enjoying a beautiful, warm, sunny day, do not ruin that exact moment by thinking, well, the sun is probably brighter and the water is clearer in the south of France right now, and rich people are enjoying it more than I am. You must learn to appreciate the sun that is actually hitting your own face.
And intimately tied to the poison of envy is the tyranny of public opinion. If we are constantly comparing ourselves to others, we become terrified of what those others think of us. This is equally restrictive.
The argument insists that to be genuinely happy, your lifestyle, your choices, your hobbies must spring from your own deep, authentic, personal impulses. They cannot be dictated by the expected tastes of your neighbors, the cultural trends of the moment, or the arbitrary rules of the press.
I would pose this as a direct challenge to the listener right now. Honestly assess the mechanics of your own daily life. Think about your wardrobe, the car you lease, the neighborhood you live in, the career path you have chosen, even the restaurants you post about.
How much of that daily routine is performed purely to avoid the hypothetical negative judgment of people you don't even particularly like or
When
respect?
you actually quantify it, it is a staggering, tragic waste of your limited life energy.
Ouch. That is a brutal mirror to look into. But thankfully, the philosophy we are exploring doesn't just leave us sitting in the smoking wreckage of our own bad habits and anxiety.
No, it doesn't.
We have dismantled the prisons of self-absorption, the fallacy of pessimism, the exhaustion of the rat race, the addiction to excitement, and the poison of envy. Now we finally pivot. We move from the forces that tear us down to the ultimate foundational trait that builds us up, the core characteristic of a happy life. The text calls it zest.
Zest. It's a wonderful, vibrant, almost tactile word. To explain the mechanics of zest, the author uses a fantastic analogy of four different types of eaters at a banquet, which represent four distinct psychological approaches to the banquet of life itself.
Okay, let's go through them.
First, there is the bored eater. This person views the act of eating as a tedious chore, a mere mechanical necessity to stay alive. They chew their food without tasting it, completely disengaged from the sensory experience.
That's our victim of the Byronic fallacy, right? The person who thinks life is meaningless, so they just kind of slump through it.
Exactly. Second, there is the dutiful eater. This person eats entirely out of obligation and a strict adherence to health. They count every single calorie, measure their macros, and only consume what is scientifically proven to be nutritious, completely ignoring flavor or culinary joy. Their engagement with the food is purely clinical and anxious.
That sounds like the person trapped in the rat race, doing everything strictly because it's the correct or optimized thing to do.
Precisely. Third is the glutton. This person overindulges blindly. They stuff themselves furiously until they are physically sick, completely losing the refinement of taste in a desperate, chaotic bid for absolute consumption. They are trying to fill a void that food cannot fill.
And that's our excitement addict, seeking louder and louder thrills just to feel something.
Which leaves the fourth type, the healthy eater. This person arrives at the banquet with a genuine natural appetite. They deeply taste and appreciate the flavors of the food. They engage with the meal. They eat until they are appropriately full and satisfied, and then they happily stop without regret.
A truly happy person is the healthy eater at the banquet of life. They possess zest.
I love the clarity of that breakdown.
Yeah.
And then the text takes the concept of zest a step further with an incredibly vivid mechanical metaphor. I'm talking about the sausage machine analogy.
Oh, this is a great one. Okay, imagine you have two highly complex, beautifully engineered sausage machines. They are both built for one exact purpose, to take in raw pork and transform it into the most delicious pork sausages in the world.
Right.
The first machine works perfectly. It takes in the pork, the gears grind, the mechanisms do their job, and out comes a continuous stream of excellent sausage. It is fulfilling its structural purpose.
It is functioning as designed by engaging with its proper external material.
Right. But the second machine develops a bizarre philosophical complex. It looks at the raw pork arriving on the conveyor belt and says, "What is pork to me? Why should I care about this messy external material? My own inner workings, the intricate design of my gears, the gleam of my cogs, the fascinating complexity of my grinding mechanisms are vastly more important and interesting than some outside meat."
So it forcefully rejects the pork.
Right.
It turns all of its mechanical energy inward to study and grind against itself. And because it is running at full speed without any external material to process, metal grinds against metal. It wears down its own gears, it begins to smoke, it breaks down completely, and it ultimately realizes it is completely empty.
It is a profound, gritty metaphor for the architecture of the human mind. The human mind is, by its very evolutionary design, an apparatus meant to process the external world. It desperately needs outward material experiences, relationships, challenges, knowledge to function properly.
Now, introspection, studying your own gears, is necessary in small, occasional doses for self-correction. But pure, unbroken introspection, studying your own mind while refusing to feed it external reality, inevitably leads to a psychological breakdown. It leads to the gnawing emptiness of the sinner, the narcissist and the megalomaniac.
Zest, therefore, is defined as having a wide, voracious, unquenchable variety of interests in the world outside yourself.
The example used to illustrate this outward focus is Sherlock Holmes, which is perfect. Sherlock Holmes can find a battered, abandoned hat rolling in the muddy street. Most people would just see dirty felt and walk past it.
But Holmes has an intense, almost manic zest for external reality. He picks up the hat and his mind immediately engages. He looks at the dust on the crown, the specific fraying on the inner band, the moisture of the lining, and from those external details, he deduces a man's entire life story, his financial status, his marital problems.
That isn't just a party trick. It represents a mind that is fully, thrillingly alive because it is completely absorbed in the external world.
Oh wait, let me play devil's advocate here because this can get confusing. Is there a difference between having genuine zest and just being a glutton for experiences? Think about someone who travels constantly, hopping from country to country, partying every single night, trying every extreme sport they can find. They have a massive amount of external material going into their machine. Are they demonstrating zest, or are they just gluttons at the banquet?
This raises an important question, and drawing the distinction is absolutely crucial for understanding the whole philosophy. Zest is not synonymous with destructive, chaotic extremism.
Right.
Remember the glutton at the banquet.
Right.
The glutton, the chronic drunkard, or the person compulsively seeking extreme thrills. If you examine their psychology, they're almost always trying to forget a problem. Their hyperactivity is a frantic escape mechanism to run away from pain, trauma, or a terrifying sense of inner emptiness. They aren't looking at the world, they are running from themselves.
Ah, so the intention behind the action changes the nature of the action.
Exactly. Genuine zest is the exact opposite of escapism. Zest is about engaging with reality because you find reality inherently fascinating, valuable, and lovable in its own right. You aren't running away from your own mind. You're running toward the richness of the world.
Furthermore, true zest operates within a structured, balanced framework. It respects the biological limits of physical health, it honors social and family obligations, and it contributes to the broader society.
It is an appetite that is fundamentally healthy and sustaining, not a consumption that is pathological and destructive.
That makes total sense. It's the difference between engaging with the world out of love versus escaping into the world out of fear. And naturally, if we cultivate this healthy zest for the world, it deeply, fundamentally alters how we interact with the human beings in it.
Which brings us to the most profound outward connections a human can possibly have: love and family. The analysis does not shy away from the gritty complexities here. It categorizes love into two very distinct opposing types.
Yes, the mechanics of affection are broken down into a love born of security and a love born of insecurity. The love born of internal security is life-giving. It operates as a mutual, joyful exchange of energy where both individuals are enriched, feeling stronger and more expansive through the connection. They enjoy each other's independent existence.
But the love born of insecurity is vampiric. It is suffocatingly demanding. The insecure lover does not actually see their partner as a separate, independent human being with their own internal life. They see their partner merely as a mirror to reflect their own worth, or as a life raft to keep them from drowning.
They constantly, anxiously drain the other person's emotional energy in a desperate attempt to shore up their own failing self-assurance.
It's the narcissist trying to do romance. It destroys the partner. And when it comes to the broader family unit, the observations made here are chillingly accurate, especially considering they were written decades ago.
The author notes that the modern family is in a state of profound psychological crisis. He observed that parents had become overly, almost paralyzingly anxious.
With the rise of modern psychology and psychoanalysis, parents became absolutely terrified of making a mistake, terrified of giving their children an Oedipal complex, or inflicting lifelong trauma with a single harsh word.
And this parental anxiety collided with another major societal shift. Modern single life, particularly for the affluent and educated, began to offer unprecedented levels of freedom, mobility, and personal comfort.
So when an individual transitions from that highly autonomous, free single life into the demanding, anxious reality of modern parenthood, it increasingly feels like a massive, heavy, restrictive sacrifice, rather than a natural, joyful, biological progression.
And the direct, measurable result of this psychological shift.
The author correctly identified that this dynamic has directly contributed to a steeply declining birth rate among highly civilized, affluent populations. When parenthood is culturally reframed primarily as a heavy burden, a financial drain, and a potential psychological minefield, rational people simply opt out.
However, He counters this modern hesitation with a very deep evolutionary argument. Biologically and psychologically speaking, parenthood offers the deepest, most continuous, and most profound form of happiness available to a human being.
Why? What is the specific mechanism of that happiness?
Because it uniquely and tangibly connects the isolated individual to the grand stream of life. If you live an entirely isolated existence, no matter how materially successful you are, your physical death is the absolute hard end of your story. The book closes.
But through parenthood, a part of your biological makeup, your values, and your psychological influence physically extends forward into the unknown future. You transcend your own mortality by becoming a link in an unbroken, ongoing chain.
But the text is very, very clear that this joy is not automatic. Just having a kid doesn't magically fix your life.
Hmm.
To truly access the joy of parenthood, parents have to perform a very difficult psychological trick.
They must learn to genuinely respect the child's independent personality.
You have to completely replace the very natural, primal animal urge to physically and emotionally dominate your offspring with a tender, almost mystical reverence for the fact that this child is an autonomous, separate human being.
They are not an extension of your own ego, and they are not a second chance for you to achieve the things you failed at.
Exactly. Modern democracy and the cultural push for equality have, thankfully, drastically changed family dynamics. The historical era of the tyrannical patriarch who demands absolute, unquestioning blind obedience is largely gone, and morally, that is a massive improvement.
But the practical problem is that while we discarded this simplistic tool of blind obedience, we haven't yet fully mastered the complex gentleness, patience, and mutual respect required to maintain a functioning family built on equal footing.
Because we lack that nuanced skill, modern families are often rife with low-level friction and resentment. The biological joy of extending your life into the future, of participating in the stream of life, only yields genuine happiness if you resist the urge to treat your children as your personal property to be managed, optimized, and controlled.
I want you, the listener, to pause and reflect on this in the context of your own life right now. Are we treating our relationships, whether with our kids, our spouses, or our friends, like a transactional ledger?
The analysis points out a simple but absolutely devastating truth about human nature. People want to be loved. They want to be delighted in. They absolutely do not want to just be tolerated out of a grim sense of moral duty, obligation, or self-sacrifice.
If you are constantly martyring yourself for your family, sighing heavily as you do the dishes, they will feel that resentful energy, and it will slowly kill the joy in the house for everyone, including you.
That is a vital psychological insight. Martyrdom in relationships breeds guilt and resentment, not affection. True outward affection must be freely given, not tallied on a scorecard.
Right. So beyond the deep, complex waters of family and affection, the other massive anchors that connect our minds to the external world are our work and our hobbies. These are the daily activities that keep our mental sausage machines happily grinding away on external material instead of turning inward to consume themselves.
The philosophy we are exploring places a shockingly high emphasis on the value of work, even mundane work.
It does, because work serves a fundamental baseline psychological function. Even tedious, repetitive work is incredibly valuable because it prevents the intense, soul-crushing despair of having absolutely nothing to do with your days. A life of total idleness is a psychological nightmare.
Furthermore, having mandatory work creates a contrast that makes your leisure time feel earned and infinitely more enjoyable. If every single day is a Sunday, Sunday loses all of its magic and becomes just another day to kill time.
But the text makes a vital distinction between merely having a job that pays the bills and engaging in the best kind of work. The most deeply satisfying human work always offers two key mechanical elements: the opportunity to exercise a skill and the element of constructiveness.
Let's look at skill first. Exercising a skill is psychologically rewarding because there is theoretically no upper limit to mastery. You can always get incrementally better at your craft, whether you are a neurosurgeon performing complex operations, a carpenter cutting the perfect joint, or a coder optimizing an elegant piece of software. That path of continuous improvement is deeply engaging.
And then there is constructiveness, which is the real secret sauce of lasting joy. The author compares the psychology of constructive work to the psychology of destructive work.
And the distinction is profound. Destructive work tearing things down might offer a very quick, sharp spike of dopamine. Think of the thrill of winning a brutal military battle, or absolutely dismantling an opponent's argument in a debate, or writing a scathing takedown of a movie.
But that joy is incredibly fleeting. It fades to ashes the exact second the enemy is defeated or the argument is won. You are left with a void. Constructive work, however, operates on a compounding mechanism.
Think of planting a lush garden in what used to be a barren patch of dirt, or making a new scientific discovery, or writing a helpful book. Constructive work yields lasting, enduring pleasure. You can step back years later, look at what you built in the physical or intellectual world, and feel a continuous wave of satisfaction.
And alongside our primary career, the author places immense, almost surprising value on what he calls impersonal interests. These are hobbies and fascinations that must be completely 100% disconnected from your main source of income and your daily anxieties.
This could be collecting obscure stamps, reading dense history books about the rise and fall of ancient civilizations, learning about the orbital mechanics of astronomy, or passionately following the archaeological excavations at the ancient city of Ur.
So what does this all mean?
If I have a tedious, repetitive 9 to 5 job logging data that absolutely does not feel constructive and I'm exhausted when I get home, how do I find this joy? Am I just doomed by capitalism?
Not at all. The philosophical framework clarifies that you are not defined solely by your economic output. Even if your 9 to 5 job is purely tedious and unfulfilling, you can entirely fulfill this deep human need for constructiveness elsewhere in your life.
Applying yourself intentionally to raising your children well is intensely, profoundly constructive work. Or dedicating your free time to mastering a fascinating niche hobby fulfills this exact same psychological need. These impersonal interests are not just trivial pastimes, they act as a vital biological pressure valve for the subconscious mind.
How does that pressure valve mechanism actually work?
Think of your mind's bandwidth. While your conscious mind is completely focused on learning about the gaseous composition of the moons of Jupiter, your subconscious mind is finally allowed to rest. It gets a break from grinding on your anxiety about paying the electric bill or a conflict with your boss. The external interest pulls the energy outward.
Furthermore, when genuine tragedy strikes, and in a long human life, tragedy strikes everyone eventually, having these pre-planted seeds of interest in the wider universe can literally save your sanity. They give your mind a place to go when the immediate reality is too painful to bear.
Recognizing our own unimportance on a cosmic scale, which you visceral feel when studying something vast like astronomy or deep ancient history, strangely provides an immense comforting relief. It lifts the crushing weight of our petty daily anxieties off our shoulders.
I absolutely love that perspective. Looking through a telescope at burning stars millions of light years away and realizing that your awkward interaction at the office today really truly isn't the end of the universe. It scales our problems down to their proper size.
So if we take a massive step back and synthesize this entire journey we've been on, if we have managed to successfully conquer the inward-looking prisons of our own ego, if we have cultivated a ravenous zest for the external world, if we have learned to love our families securely without trying to dominate them, and if we are actively engaging in constructive work and expansive cosmic hobbies, we finally arrive at the ultimate philosophical stance described in this roadmap.
Yes, the author brings us, ultimately, to what might historically be called the middle way, or the doctrine of moderation. Now, he openly acknowledges that the concept of moderation sounds incredibly boring, especially to the young.
Youth biologically and psychologically craves heroic extremes, grand, sweeping tragedies, and absolute flawless triumphs. But the mature, tested mind realizes that the doctrine of moderation is deeply functionally true to the mechanics of reality.
A consistently happy life absolutely requires effort. It is not a magical gift that just falls into the lap of the average person while they sit on the couch. We must work to earn our living, yes. But more importantly, we must actively, daily work to cultivate our outward focus and our zest. It requires maintenance.
Effort, yes. We have to pedal the bicycle to keep it upright. But the crucial final twist in this philosophy is that this intense effort must be perfectly, delicately balanced with its apparent opposite, resignation.
Exactly. And again, to avoid misunderstanding, he makes a very careful distinction here.
Yeah.
There is bad resignation, which is rooted in total despair, the Byronic fallacy, and giving up on the value of life entirely. And then there is good resignation, which is rooted in an unconquerable, broader hope for the world itself.
Let's clarify that mechanism. What does good resignation actually look like in practice?
It means that if your personal ego-driven goals fail, you study for years but don't get the promotion, You pour your heart into a manuscript, and it is rejected by every publisher. Your startup business goes completely undershoot. But you are philosophically aligned with the broader progress, beauty, and continuity of humanity in the universe. You can accept that personal defeat.
You can gracefully resign yourself to the loss without being psychologically destroyed by it because your entire identity was not staked on that single outcome.
I can hear the hyper-competitive folks objecting to this right now. Does resignation just mean giving up the second things get hard? Do we just say, oh, well, the universe is big, my startup failed, I guess I'll just go look at a telescope and stop trying to succeed?
Not at all. True resignation, in this specific philosophical sense, means doing your absolute utmost best in whatever endeavor you pursue. You put in the maximum possible effort, you fight for the goal.
But once the outcome is definitively decided by reality, and if that outcome is out of your control and goes against you, you do not let your core ego shatter. You accept reality. It means fundamentally shifting how you view your place in physics and society.
You stop seeing yourself as a hard, isolated billiard ball, violently clashing against other objects on the table of life, constantly fighting for dominance and territory. Instead, you see yourself as a fluid, connected, integral part of the larger stream of life.
The truly happy person does not suffer from a divided self, fighting exhausting internal civil wars of guilt and narcissism. Nor are they a self pitted violently and enviously against the rest of the world. They have become, in the truest, most profound sense, a citizen of the universe.
A citizen of the universe. That is an incredibly powerful, expansive place to land, and it completely reframes the blurry, murky landscape of modern unhappiness we talked about at the very beginning of this deep dive.
We started by looking for a simple binary diagnostic fix, a pill or a life hack, for why we feel so drained and anxious on a Tuesday. But the reality revealed by this deep dive is that the cure isn't a quick fix. It's a complete foundational reorientation of where our eyes are looking.
We have to forcibly stop staring into the broken, squeaking machinery of our own egos and start looking outward at the incredible, messy, complex, fascinating banquet of the external world.
It is the profound shift from waking up and anxiously asking, why am I not happy today?
Yeah.
To looking out the window and asking, what in this magnificent, chaotic world can I be deeply interested in today? The exact moment you make that shift, the door of the psychological prison opens.
I want to leave you, the listener, with a final provocative thought to mull over today, building on the mechanics of everything we've unpacked. If true happiness is indeed an outward conquest, what is one specific thing in your immediate environment right now? Maybe a person you see every single day but don't really listen to, a constructive hobby you abandoned years ago, or even a complex piece of nature right outside your window that you've been completely ignoring because you've been too busy looking inward at your own anxieties. What would actually happen to your brain chemistry if you truly, deeply, and exclusively paid attention to it today? Don't forget to follow us and subscribe to stay updated on our latest episodes and never miss a step in this odyssey of thought. Until next time, keep questioning.